Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Storytelling with a Purpose. I'm Jim DeLorenzo, a public relations consultant here in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. And this season, I'm diving into one of my favorite topics, media training, and how it helps people tell their stories better, whether they're behind a microphone, on stage, or pitching to the press. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Nora Barry, a recent acquaintance of mine here at the Pyramid Club, someone who has been living and breathing story strategy for over 20 years. Her work with companies like Red Hat, Lenovo, Oracle, and Pfizer, and her terrific book, The Strategy of Story, give us a ton to talk about. How to cut through the noise, how to communicate with clarity, and how to craft a message that actually sticks. So let's get right into the heart of it. Nora, I'm glad that you're here today.
Thank you, Jim. Pleasure to be here.
And as I've mentioned in passing, media training right now is kind of one of the focuses I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone thinks they know how to handle the media. Everyone thinks they know how to do PR. Everybody always thinks that they know everything that they need to know.
Right, because they have an Apple iPhone.
Right, exactly. So in this day and age, I was fascinated by your book. As I mentioned, The Strategy of Story, still on sale, and I know you're working on a revision to it. The Strategy of Story, Why Story Works, and How You Can Make It Work for You. I've read it 3 times now.
I'm flattered.
And I am going to write a very positive review for you. But one of the things that caught me right off the bat and kind of ties into why I am a big believer in media training is this phrase early in the book. This endless content stream has become a huge digital rubbish landfill. People just keeping tossing posts and emails and slides into a pit where they pile up and no one pays any attention to them. It's as if audiences know in advance we're probably wasting their time, and they respond by not even bothering to open, much less read, what we send them. And I just loved that phrasing,
Mm-hmm.
and I totally agree with it. And that's why I think media training can be a big part of overcoming or getting beyond that digital landfill that we're all experiencing. And when you wrote this, published this in 2022, it's gotten even worse since then.
Yes, absolutely.
Why do you think there is this problem of the digital rubbish landfill? What do you think has been
I think it's
driving?
It's too easy to create things. Pre-digital, somebody would hire a writer that would go through multiple drafts. It would go through an approval process. It would go to layout if it was an ad.
Sure.
It would go to pre-production if it was a video. There wasn't really a lot of digital prior to 1995. So it took time and effort to do something. So
Yes.
when you made it, it stayed around. The same could be said of clothing and a lot of other goods.
Right.
So it became very, very easy to replicate. So in my opinion, it led to this tendency to just create something very quickly to get it out.
Yes.
And get it off your desk. And then if you didn't like it, you would say, oh, well, I'll just do that again. And I'll create a 10-second email or a 10-second video loop. It just became too easy. And now with AI, Gen AI, it's getting even easier to create. And so the problem is there's no consistency in the stories we're telling. There's no consistency in our messaging. We don't take the time to create this umbrella architecture of what it is we need to say.
Right.
So to me, when you're going to go out in public and communicate, whether it's, through crisis communication or through a podcast, however, you should have an overarching strategy. And under that strategy are your stories and your messages.
Right.
And you need to stick to those because you want people to be able to repeat what it is you tell them, remember and repeat, not delete.
And, one of the things that I want to circle back to, again, storytelling, having the story, working on your story, and then being able to adapt it to any platform, any media, any medium. But the whole thing boils down to the story. You can't tell the story in a TikTok video if you don't know what the basic underlying story is.
Right.
You can't tell it in a X post or or on Blue Sky or Threads or Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook. You can't tell something that's impactful unless you've really worked on that story beforehand and know what part of that story you're going to use those platforms for.
So the filmmaker John Sayles, who hasn't made a film in a while, but he's a filmmaker, he's a film editor, he's written and produced plays, he has written books, so he's worked in every single medium that there is. And he has a great quote that I like to use, which is, stories arrive in the medium best suited to their telling. Now, for him in the creative process, that's true. He may come up with a story and it may cry out, this is a play, or it may cry out, this is an independent film.
Right.
But for us, when we're doing purposeful storytelling for business communications, we don't have the luxury of waiting for that to happen, but we still have to respect the technology, the medium, because the story interacts with that technology and creates a different experience of the story. So you have to understand not just what your story is before you go in, you have to understand how that technology works, how it interacts with your audience, and who your audience is on the other end of that technological medium. Because one audience may live on TikTok, another audience may live on LinkedIn. You can make a video on TikTok. It's not going to be the same video you put up on LinkedIn, God willing.
Yes, we hope. We always hope. One of the things that I was fascinated by in the book, and kind of we talked about this just a little bit, is how story engages with the brain and our chemical reactions, the neurological impact. And in the book, you go into great detail about some of the neurological studies that you researched and spoke about, and the whole idea of it affecting our
our emotions, all the chemicals in our body, and actually, this is going to be in my updated version. I've been doing even more research into the science behind storytelling, because I find that the science is what makes story so successful.
Yeah.
So first off, we're born thinking in story. There are scientists who have studied infant children and children who are only a few months old, and they find that children are already thinking in narrative before they even develop the capacity for language. So we're born thinking in story. We learn in story. We intuitively communicate in story. So when something is presented in story form, it's very familiar. We understand it. We relax. The barriers to understanding come down. The resistance to understanding comes down. But when you emotionally engage with the story, which is what you're referring to, and that requires a character, a well thought out character, which can be a product or a company as well as a person. But when you emotionally engage with a character, it releases a whole bunch of trust hormones, oxytocin, cortisol, a whole bunch of chemicals, and that makes us feel empathetic. We want to engage with the character in the story, and that actually increases our retention. We remember it because we're more emotionally engaged.
And I think that's I've been preaching that without the neurological science behind it, but I've always share with my clients that we want to tell a story that gets them in the heart first. We want to get heart share before we get to mind share, so that we can engage with them authentically.
Right.
And then through that authentic connection that we've made with the heart share, then they're much more likely to know, like, trust, want to work with us, want to buy from us, want to do something with us.
Trust is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
If you don't have the audience's trust, no matter how good your story is, they're not going to follow you.
Now, in your book and in our discussions, we talked about keeping the audience engaged from the beginning, whether it be a live presentation, whether it be video, whether it be audio, whether it be a podcast, whatever the platform or whatever the delivery is. What are some of the things that you share with your clients as when you're executive coaching practice within your business? How do you coach them to be aware of their audience, aware of their setting, and aware of their story, and do that all naturally with with a kind of like uninterrupted flow? How do you get them to
Preparation.
buy into that?
You have to prepare.
Yeah.
You have to prepare. There's no two ways about it. I had a busy executive one time say to me, well, just give me the bottom line. What do I have to do? And I said, you have to rehearse. You have to prepare. There's no secret sauce here other than rehearsing and preparing. So in the preparation, you have to understand who your audience is, what language they speak. And by that, I don't mean French, German, Italian. I mean, what industry sector are they in?
Sure.
Because each vertical has its own jargon. So you have to understand the language they speak. You have to understand where you are meeting them. Is it 8 a.m. in Las Vegas after they've all been out all night drinking? Is it after lunch, in Orlando where it's really hot and people are about to fall asleep? You have to understand the entire context of where you are meeting them. And that requires work ahead of time. You meet with whoever is producing the event, the conference, and say, tell me about, who's in the audience. And you should know who's in the audience, but tell me about what comes before, what comes after. Understand the context of your presentation. In terms of how do you connect with then you do your story, of course, but then when you're live in front of an audience, hopefully having prepared and rehearsed extensively, you have to just sort of give into the flow of the moment and connect with the people. And I always advise, even if it's a large room, look down into the first couple of rows and make eye contact with the people there. Connect with them. And that way it's not a sea of faces, it's people with whom you're speaking. Yeah. So connect emotionally that way. Make sure that you cover the stage. This is another piece of advice I give. And by that, I don't mean pace endlessly, which people will do when they're nervous, but use the stage space deliberately. Make sure, and again, a lot of these conferences where I've worked, there's 10,000 people in the audience. So it's a rather large stage. So take advantage of that. Walk over here, walk over to this part of the stage, engage there.
You want to make sure that they're paying attention.
Yes.
And if you do something where you move in this direction, are they following you, or are they looking down at their phones, or are they? So yeah, I've always believed one of the lessons I learned as a teenager. I was very fortunate to be the lay reader at Catholic masses in my home parish in Trenton, and I first started out and I was very, very nervous, and I would look at the book, and I was like 13, 10, 11 or 12, something like that. And I would look at the book, and I would never look up.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I got a little bit more comfortable, and I would take the readings home with me, and I would read them that afternoon before we went to church. And then I started looking at the people in the audience, in the pews, and I would make eye contact, like catch somebody over here, and I would look over here, and I would look somebody in the back, and all of a sudden, people would be coming up to me after mass and saying, "Boy, you're really good." And I wasn't really trying to be really good. I was just trying to be
you made eye contact. You connected. Yeah.
I connected with these people, and I learned from that lesson, and I've tried to share that with my clients when I'm doing media training.
Right.
Is that idea of make eye contact with the people, no matter what the size of the room is. Mm-hmm. We're talking on camera here. One of the things that happened during the pandemic, when everybody pivoted to Zoom and Google Meets and Microsoft Teams and things like that, was that you would see a lot of people on camera, and you would be talking, and you would look at and see the people that you were talking to, and they were heads down, writing their nose. So you would see the top of their head on camera. And that became very disconcerting to me.
Oh,
and then I started thinking about, how do I avoid that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of transcription services now. There's things like Otter and
absolutely,
things like that, where you can use that for note taking.
Right.
And that's only gotten better since that crush of 2020.
Right.
But the other thing that I adopted early on was I just put everything aside and I just look at the camera.
Right.
I'm making eye contact with the camera because I'm making eye contact with the people I'm talking to. And I remember speaking to an executive recruiter in 2021, and he was complaining about how he never really understood. He never really got a good feel for the people he was interviewing as candidates
On
through the
camera.
Zoom call.
Right.
And I said, "Oh, how are you connecting with them?" He says, "Well, I'm taking my notes." And he showed me the top of his head. I said, "You've got to stop doing that."
Right.
That was and when I explained to him why he had to stop doing that, all of a sudden he's like, the light went on.
Mm-hmm.
So even with this technology that we have, we still need to make eye contact. We still need to be seeing people
Absolutely.
and letting them see us, because it's all connected.
Yes.
Our
And you have
words
to make the connection.
right.
Yes.
So it is a performance, no matter what your. Another example from my childhood was 3 years old, being in a recital and waiting to go on stage in this recital. I'm 3 years old, and there's a kid standing next to me. He's all nervous. I said, "Don't worry about it. This is showbiz." And then I went out and I did whatever I was supposed to be doing. But it is
It's a lot of sang-froid for a 3-year-old.
Well, I'm still nervous about it, but yeah, everything is showbiz.
Uh-huh.
Whether we believe it or not, we're on camera now everywhere we go.
Right.
Be prepared.
Yeah. I don't see. I think there are two types of people. I think there are people who like performing, and the people whom I coach don't like performing.
Right.
They're not professional actors. And I always say, I'm not trying to turn you into a professional actor. My job is to make you as comfortable as I can with who you are, with the story you're telling, and then with your ability to actually go out in public and deliver that presentation or tell that story. So I think for people who don't like to be out on stage, and it's not one of my favorite things either, even though I coach to that, I feel their pain. You really have to find a way to get over the fear. And I think you have to believe in what you're saying. You have to believe in your story.
Right.
You have to believe in your content. The first thing I do when somebody calls me and says, will you coach our exec? I say, send me the deck.
Yeah.
Because I need to know, do I need to start way back here with the content, or can I simply pick up a really good presentation and run with it? And frequently it starts with doing a better job with the content. I had one executive, again, it was a big stage. It was in front of a lot of people, and I had not done the speech writing. I was there to coach. And I'm standing here, and I'm in the audience watching her, and the stage is about up here, and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
The speech wasn't working. And she saw my expression. She called me up and she said, what do you think? And I said, I don't think it's working.
Yeah.
Whoever wrote that for you, it's not working for you. I said, you know more than anybody else in this room. You're the CEO. Cancel all your meetings tonight. Go home, take your makeup off, put your sweatpants on, and reboot your presentation yourself, because you don't have any confidence in the material that was created for you, which is why you're stumbling all the time.
Right.
You really absolutely have to have confidence in what you're saying. And so she did. She went back to the hotel, canceled her appointments, got up the next morning, headed out of the ballpark, but it was her presentation.
Right.
It was her story.
It's
right.
her story, and it's her knowledge.
Yeah.
And her expertise. You want to be able to tell the story in your own words, on your own terms.
Right. You have to believe, and this is a problem, and this is a bit of a hyperlink, but it's a problem that's coming up with AI. It's a problem you have unless you have someone on staff who is your ongoing speechwriter, who understands how you speak, who understands how you think, who understands your approach to things. If you're an executive, who has that kind of speechwriter on call or on staff, then you're in a much better position. But in a lot of events, you come in from out of town and you have to create the event from scratch, or you have to take something that's been created by someone several levels down. And it's not in their voice. They're not comfortable with it. And now we are facing a lot of Gen AI created content coming up and being used. And for the record, they've done research studies, and people can figure out whether what the executive is saying has been written by them or by AI. So again, it goes back to believing in what you're saying. And that means being able to tell a story about it really well as having a really good deck to go with it.
Yeah, I think that's that's going to be a key issue going forward. And I probably would like to have you back because I know you've been doing some things with AI.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably love to get back to you with that as a second show for us. But yeah, I see a lot of things that are being created with the help of AI. I confess that I am using AI to a small degree, but I don't take people's words and try to turn it into something that AI can generate. I try to maintain that authentic voice. And kind of coming back to this, there's a story in your book, and we talked about it before the show, of you doing a project for a company and finding one of the original help wanted ads.
Yes.
Could you share that with us? Because
Sure.
I think that's a fascinating approach to finding the genuine article,
Yeah.
finding the genuine heart of the story and an emotional touch point.
Right. So it's what I call an origin story, which is surprisingly, a lot of large organizations don't have access to the stories of how they were founded or why the original people got together and decided to create this idea and create the company. I find those stories very inspirational. I know you do too. We've spoken about this. And the company was Red Hat. It was before it was acquired by IBM. And I was working in a big culture project. And I thought, well, everybody sort of knows the story of how this came about, but let's look at how it really came about. And I worked with somebody on the team and got into the archives, and we found when the company only had 6 people. Was it Mark Ewing? It was Mark Ewing.
Yeah.
And then who was the other one who came along, who was the partner with him, who ended up starting Lulu, the publishing company? Anyway, he was the other half of it. But Mark Ewing had written an ad, and it laid out all these funny requirements for what they wanted in somebody to join the team, and they were all very idiosyncratic. And I thought, I went to the EVP for whom I was working, and I said, look, you're the same company. That was 6 people. You're 20,000 people. It's the same attitude. It has carried through. And then I dug a little deeper, and I was able to, a fair amount of people had left. I think Mark Ewing actually went into hiding. He's a recluse. But no kidding. I found the 6th person who had been hired by the company, and I was able to go in and interview her and write her story. So those kinds of things in large companies, especially companies that have strong cultures or want to develop strong cultures, using that kind of origin story to share it out among the employees makes everybody feel as if they were a part of that experience.
Yeah.
And they can live that history even today. They remember what that was like. That's not unlike our cultural myths or oral histories that have brought us forward, that became written history, that have brought us forward to this point. It's important to know where you come from. It's important to be able to speak about that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I've always liked about one of the practices I try to do is I refer to myself as a private investigator in public relations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm digging into the story of the company or the client.
Right.
I want to find out as much as I can. I'm embedding myself with them.
Right.
That's kind of what the speechwriter, if you have a speechwriter on call, that's somebody who's getting to know their client.
Right. Getting to know their voice.
Getting to know their voice, getting to know their experiences. There's a book by Dick Nunes, who was the PR guy, one of the lead PR guys for Walt Disney in the late 50s through the 60s.
Okay.
And he took that approach. He just was there every day doing something. Walt needs a 5-minute speech at the beginning of Walt Disney Presents or something like that. So he started doing all these things for Walt Disney. And then when Walt Disney died, there was nobody who could effectively communicate what Walt Disney meant to the company other than Dick Nunes.
That's
so
interesting.
he became the go-to guy, corporate communications-wise, for all the guys who succeeded.
Oh, interesting. So he was teaching them and to pass it along.
So it was, if you wanted to get the spirit of what Disney was about, you went and
talked to
because he was there.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And again, when your startup companies or your entrepreneurs or you're a growing company, you've got to go to that person to get that origin story and kind of understand where their head was at when they did this.
And they rarely, if ever, have time to think about that when they're starting a company.
Exactly.
Legitimately so. They want to make sure they survive, and they hire people and they sell their product and they expand. So it's not the first thing they think of. But, 5-10 years down the road, if you're still alive as an entrepreneur, you should think about an origin story.
Right. And I think and that part of that, teaching the executives how to tell that story effectively.
Right.
And being able to convey it in a compelling fashion that engages the audience.
Right.
And in some ways inspires an audience.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a little bit about those crazy shows that I watch about the foods that built America or the mega brands that built America, where there's always one or two business leaders who have this crazy idea. Fred Smith, who just passed away with FedEx.
Right.
Bill Rasmussen, whom I've worked with, who started ESPN.
Right.
These people were innovators, but out of need. They needed to do something.
Right.
They wanted to do something. They had a crisis moment, and born out of that crisis were these great companies, FedEx, ESPN.
Failure stories are the best kinds of stories, right? Because, in the story structure, you want a story that has an arc that brings you on a journey, a bit of a roller coaster. It's the drama, the tension from the drama that, again, engages you in that story and helps you remember it. But failure stories are great. And I always say, tell me how you failed. Tell me what went wrong, because everybody fails. And the lesson people want to get from a story a great deal of the time is, well, then how did you overcome that? What talents did you use? What skills did you have that allowed you to overcome that failure and struggle to the top and achieve success and happiness, and
because everyone has a failure that they can relate to.
Right. Absolutely.
Everyone has a failure like that. And again, the power of story, the power of reaching heart share. I remember a presentation in Miami in the fall of 97 by Bran Farron, who was a big Disney animator and producer and a special effects artist, and he had done all these things with computers, and he was addressing the direct mail industry.
Oh, God, remember direct mail?
Can you remember direct mail? But he was explaining to the people in the direct mail industry how the internet was going to be the most powerful storytelling tool we've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ignore it, it's at your own peril.
Right.
And of course, the direct mail people, in a lot of ways, ignored that.
Right.
And where are they now? But
they're in spam email.
Right. Exactly.
That's where they are.
Exactly. Right. So, and Bran Farron's idea of this being a storytelling platform, a medium for us to tell our stories to more people, that doesn't go away. That power of the story doesn't go away. It's how we present that story and how we use the medium to tell that story.
I think and again, this goes back to, I'm as interested in the technology of storytelling as I am in the science behind storytelling, because of the way the technology has grown together. I mean, I actually one time mapped out a timeline of story technologies and telephone technologies and how the different story formats evolved from stills and magic lanterns to silent film, and then to silent film with, sound, and then black and white film with sound, and then color, and then TV. And so to me, the internet, when I had gone through and looked at the continuum, the internet to me was the natural evolution, the next phase.
Right.
And which is what led me to launch an online film site in 1998 when most of the people were saying, what video on what? On what's it called? And it was still mostly dial up at that point. But I knew, because I understood the technology of the telephone infrastructure, to be frank, cable, plain old telephone system, POTS wires and cable, coaxial cable. I saw what they were capable of. And I thought, well, I'd been online for about 5 years at that point. I got online very early on because I had a lot of technology clients. And I thought, you can put video on this telephone wire, and it's a nascent technology, but it's capable. And it was very interesting when I first launched that in 1998, the short videos were under 3 minutes. They still should be under 3 minutes. And they were only about an inch square.
I remember that as well.
Yeah. And about about 5 years later, I was actually curating a show as part of something called Future Cinema at a museum in Germany, and my part of the show was a history of web cinema, because it had been going on for 5 years at that point. And I sat down with one of the tech guys to prepare the installation, and he was banging away at the computer. And I said to him, well, what's going on? And he said, I can't get this picture any bigger. And I just started laughing because I thought, he's so used to, in 2003, he was already used to full screen video.
Right.
When what we had started with only 5 years previously was 1 inch. And so when I was launching that, I said to my creators, be careful to look at what the technology is capable of. You can't have a lot of dialogue. You can't have a lot of camera action. You had to really create very specifically for that medium. So again, this goes back to understanding the technology, the medium, no matter where it is, no matter where it's going. Understand how to tell your story in an online video differently than in an email, than in a live presentation, than in a blog post or an article. All of those, even the written, is a different technology and allows you to do different things. I mean, especially for reading, if you give somebody a story in print, they have to engage with that story to create that story world in their head, because it's just words on paper. But if you give them a video, it's given to them. Now, interestingly, going back to the science, video is processed by your brain much faster than text. So if you want to get somebody's attention and get into their head, so to speak, very quickly, you should go to video, because it's the visual part of the brain that works first,
Right.
instead of the text. So understanding that, if you've got to get something out quickly and it's very critical, go to video. If you want somebody to take their time with it and have time to reflect on it, go to text, and then hope like hell they don't use Gen AI to summarize it.
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm interested, as we come to a close here on this episode, but first of all, I would love to have you back to talk some more about this. I think we have a lot we can cover. What is like one thing that you would recommend to any executive or business owner or entrepreneur who feels like, I could never get in front of people, I could never be a guest on a podcast, I could never host my own podcast, I have this
I have a fear of public speaking. What are my go-to tips? You and I've discussed this before. I use meditation a lot when I'm trying to calm people down. I use a number of different breathing techniques, which I do outline in the book, which totally work. If you get your breath under control, you get your nerves under control, you get your voice under control. So meditation to calm yourself down, breathing to get your voice where it needs to be, and singing.
Yeah.
So I have, I ask people to sing when I'm coaching them, because a lot of people, when they speak in the equivalent of, remember manual transmission?
Sure.
Right. They speak in the equivalent of second or third gear.
Okay.
They don't open up their voice to the full range. But when you sing, you automatically run your voices up and down the scales. Even if you're singing off key, you're using a variety of notes. You know, do, re, if I say do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, it's a lot different than if I say do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Pardon my voice. So singing actually opens up your throat. And what you need to do when you step out in public, if you're uncomfortable, is you have to control your breathing so it stays down here in your belly. You have diaphragmatic breathing. If it comes up to your chest, your voice becomes thin, your breathing becomes rapid. Then you think, everybody knows I'm sweating. And your throat has to be relaxed, because your throat is a muscle like any other muscle in your body, and you may not use it the way you use it when you're on stage. So singing actually works the muscles in your throat, opens it up, and you find more expression in what you're saying as well.
I appreciate that. I think that's a very important thought. And again, being comfortable with yourself, being comfortable with your story, being comfortable with what you're about to say, and then having that relaxation method of being able to, okay, now I'm in the moment.
Stay in the moment.
Stay
Yeah.
in the moment. And again, we talked about eye contact and we've talked about other things like that, but being in the moment, being present, and being aware of what's going on in the room around you.
Right. And that, I mean, that's where meditation can really help you, because it does teach you to stay focused in this space. You know what I mean? You're not thinking about what you said before. You're not thinking about the paragraph that's coming next. You're not thinking about the bad breakfast you had or the awful cup of coffee. You're just staying in the moment.
Yeah.
And when you're in there and you're focused, you're not worried about anything else.
Well, I really thank you, Nora, for your time today. And I highly recommend the book, The Strategy of Story, Why Story Works and How You Can Make It Work for You. It's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I bought both the hard copy and the Kindle copy. So I did my multiple readings on 2 different platforms. And I really appreciate it. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in our topic today. If our conversation today sparked ideas for you on how you can better shape and tell your story, whether for a podcast, a media interview, a presentation, or even just a social post, I'd love to help you take the next step. Storytelling with a Purpose isn't just a podcast. It's what I do every day with my clients through media training and strategic communications. You can reach me anytime at 215-266-5943 via cell, phone, or text message, or you could go to my website. I'm always happy to answer questions, share insights, or help you discover the story that's waiting to be told. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps more people find these conversations and helps them learn to tell better stories. We'll see you again very, very soon.